Okay.
That's recording.
Is that good?
Okay, great.
Okay. Okay.
So you just introduce it.
Okay. So I'll just give a little introduction, then we'll start. Is that okay?
Okay, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay. So, hi. Thanks for coming. Sorry if it's a little awkward to talk into a computer. I'm not sure where to look. In any case, we're really, really lucky to have Jan Zalasiewicz. Is that the right pronunciation?
It's close enough. Yes. Most people usually call me Jan.
Jan.
But that will do fine.
Okay. Well, we're really lucky to have Jan here talking to us today. He's a geologist and professor of paleobiology at the University of Leicester, also in the UK. He's the chairperson and convener of the Anthropocene Working Group, which is a sub-body of the International Commission on Stratigraphy. And their job is to, as I understand it, and he'll explain, is to provide proof that the Anthropocene constitutes a new geological epoch on the geological timescale. He's written a lot of really great books, in particular this one, The Earth After Us, which is sort of like a speculative nonfiction of geologists from outer space trying to see what kind of remains would be left by our civilization now in the Earth's strata. It's an amazing book. So the way we thought we would do this today was Jan will talk for a little bit, as much as he wants, and tell us about his work and about the Anthropocene. And then we'll ask a few questions that we kind of prepared to explore more the idea of the Anthropocene. And then we'll open up and we'll just talk. It'll be a general mayhem, as he put it. So be thinking about what you want to ask about and stuff like that. Cool. Okay. Does that sound good?
That sounds fine. General mayhem is just fine for me. That's the way I usually prefer to work these things. But if I make an introduction, thanks, Gary. That's it kind of sums it up. I'm part of a group of 30-ish people, about half geologists, but half other kinds of scientists and some non-scientists. There are geographers and oceanographers. We have an international lawyer as well amongst us, looking at the legal aspects of everything. And we're trying to examine the case for the Anthropocene. So this idea that humans are changing not just the Earth's environment and its ecology and its history and so on, but it's changing the geology. It's changing the geology of the Earth such that if some aliens did come back in a few million or tens of millions of years of time, they will find traces of a change in Earth history within the strata. I mean, that's the idea. And we're trying to make a case for that and simultaneously both invite that case to be attacked, as happens in science, and also try and beat it down ourselves if we don't think it makes sense. So within the group, there are both people who generally support the idea of the Anthropocene, and also people who are skeptical, who say this is nonsense. And this is exactly how it should be. And we have fine and so far amicable discussions about that. How do we go about things? I guess we start with the idea that for the Anthropocene to become real, it's got to be real on a timescale of Earth history, which is about 4.5 billion years, which geologists work with, and we divide that time up, into units which are, we hope, meaningful and we hope convenient. So not too many names, we forget them all, not too few, because they would not reflect the complexity of Earth history. So we have a just right number of names in there, and so we tend not to make up too many. We would confuse ourselves if we made too many names, and therefore the whole business of setting up the geological timescale, the names like the Jurassic and the Cretaceous and the Carboniferous and so forth, is very conservative. Geologists are fairly slow on the uptake, and I certainly go along with that myself. And we don't like to see too many changes. So anything new that comes along, like Anthropocene, is by definition and by tradition looked at suspiciously. And it has to jump through a lot of hoops and pass a lot of tests to be accepted. And the Anthropocene is so new and so bizarre in many ways that it probably has extra hoops to jump through, to be accepted. It is currently informal. It's just a name out there that we're working on, and it probably will take some years for it to be formalised, if at all. I say it's not certain that it will be formalised. The idea isn't new in itself. I mean, geologists, really since the beginning of geology, have suggested that humans are altering the face of the Earth, and therefore they're altering geology. The oldest reference that I can find to it is 1778. The Comte de Buffon, who wrote the first, if you like, geology textbook, the first scientific history of the Earth. He had 7 epochs, the 7th of which was an epoch when humans assisted the powers of nature. Buffon was an optimist. He thought humans were improving the Earth. And others came after him, sporadically, suggesting that there was, if you like, a human epoch or a human era. And for almost all of that time, geologists, my tribe, my friends, my colleagues, basically said nonsense. This cannot be true, partly because we think of far too short a time. We should not be talking centuries, decades, millennia, when Earth history is measured in millions of years. That's for one. The other thing is that Earth history is really dramatic. We do have mountain ranges forming, and being worn down. We have ocean basins opening and closing. We have enormous volcanic eruptions, as we have not yet seen in history. We have very large and very distressing meteorite impacts. And all these have changed the Earth. And my friends, my colleagues, until very recently, almost universally said humans may look, our towns and cities may look special, but on an Earth scale, we're trivial and insignificant. So that is really the context that we're coming from. Now, that began to change probably late in the last millennium. I'd have thought 1980s, perhaps 1990s. Some scientists were beginning to get the idea that although humans have not been around for very long, they're beginning to make significant, perhaps permanent changes. And part of this was tied in with ideas like acid rain. Climate change is a fairly big part of it, though that's complicated, so I might get to. Part of it was tied into the idea of, let's say, biodiversity loss and things like that, which is also a complicated subject when we come up to a purpose. When the Anthropocene itself, as a widely used term, dates from the year 2000, when a scientist, one of the world's really eminent scientists, called Paul Crutzen, not a geologist, but an atmospheric chemist. He won a Nobel Prize for his work on the ozone layer and the mechanisms of how humans were affecting and diminishing the ozone layer. He was at a meeting in Mexico when people, his colleagues, were talking about change in the Holocene. And the Holocene is formally the epoch, the geological epoch we're in, which is the time since the last glaciation, since ice retreat. and as the conversation was going, Paul became increasingly impatient and a bit agitated, and finally goes through and said, "No, stop it. We're not in the Holocene. We're in the," and he searched for a word. We're in the Anthropocene. He put the word together on the hoof, as it were. And it kind of stopped people in their tracks. And most of the rest of that meeting was about this idea of the Anthropocene. When he got back home, he was an honest scientist, as well as an energetic one. He chased the idea up. He found that he wasn't the person that invented the term. A rather more retiring scientist called Eugene Sturmer had been using the word previously over the last few years. Eugene was a lake ecologist, and he also thought that the world was changing. So Paul got in touch with Eugene Sturmer and suggested they write a paper about this. This idea was worth publishing. So they published it first in something called the International Geosphere-Biosphere newsletter, where very few people saw it. It's one of the world's obscure journals. And then Paul, after that, published it himself in Nature, which is one of the world's high-profile journals, in 2002, which is when most people, including me, first saw the term. After that, the term took off. And I, as a geologist, I forgot about it, of course, as one does, one reads many papers. But then this word began to come back, and I could see being used in scientific publications as if it was a real formal term. It wasn't a real formal term. So with colleagues of mine who were stratigraphers who were involved in the geological timescale, we discussed it. Could it be for real? Is it nonsense, or might there be something in it? And somewhat to my surprise, I was then on something called the Stratigraphy Commission of the Geological Society of London. It's a very old grouping of very technical geologists, a mixture of academics and oil company geologists and people like that, government survey geologists and such like. Very non-radical, non-revolutionary, quite good company, I have to say. As a commission, we have, and it's something we hold to firmly, and nobody will shake us off. We have the privilege of having a free lunch at our free with wine, with free wine. We've hung on to that privilege for forever, and it helps discussion along for us. So I can't remember whether it was before lunch or after lunch we discussed this term. And most of the people present thought it made some kind of sense, that humans were altering the Earth enough to set up a new geological name for it. And so we published. We had no power to change the timescale. That's up to the international body, etc. But in our kind of cautious and halting way, it said, perhaps this term ought to be examined with a potential view to sometime in the future formalizing it. All very cautious, moving at 1 millimeter per 1,000 years as we do in this trade. And really that's where we went from there. After the paper was published, we were invited to form an international group, which, as Stephanie said, this is Anthropocene Working Group of the International Commission on Stratigraphy. And we're testing the idea out. We have been doing that for about 5 years. And we're trying to work out whether it makes sense or not. And I think we do agree that, by and large, humans are significantly impacting Earth geology. If it makes sense, how does one define it? That means, so when should it start? And there have been various ideas from several thousand years ago when humans started hunting and affecting the Earth's biology, or when humans started farming. There's another popular idea, again, a few thousand years ago, or when the Industrial Revolution started. But really the idea that seems to find most favour is even more recent. It is in the mid-20th century, something that's being called the Great Acceleration. When the world, in effect, expanded and globalised. So change in the world wasn't just in one part of the world. It was pretty well taking place everywhere. That's when, let's say, there've been most of the increase in carbon dioxide has taken place since about 1950. All the radionuclides, artificial radionuclides from bomb tests have landed on the Earth since then. All the plastics that are around us, and I can see, in the room around you, have been formed since then. And so on. A lot of the biological change has taken place since then. So that is the idea. Another question you have to ask, and this is the most difficult one of all, is it useful to formalize Anthropocene? There are a number of geological time terms, like the Precambrian, which is out there, which everybody uses, but which is not a formal part of the timescale. The Tertiary, also, the time after the dinosaurs, before the ice ages, that is no longer a formal time term, yet everybody uses it. So could the Anthropocene simply stay as an informal time term? Certainly, a number of my colleagues think that is the cautious thing to do. Give it time. Perhaps give it a few thousand years, they say, and then we may be able to decide how the Earth is changing. So those are the kind of questions. What kind of evidence do we use? Well, basically we have three kinds of evidence. We have physical evidence, chemical evidence, and biological evidence. Physical evidence is what is around you. The walls and the ceiling and the floor of the building you're in is a physical structure made out of geological materials, metals, sand, gravel, limestone, mud, to make brick and concrete, which is eminently fossilizable in the right circumstances. And we're converting a large part of the landscape in many ways by building dams, by farming, by building what we might call urban strata of buildings. And those are spreading and making substantial structures. But we've got chemical evidence. The chemical changes to the carbon cycle, as we all know about, likely to climate change. Even bigger changes in the nitrogen cycle. We've doubled the amount of reactive nitrogen at the Earth's surface. Changes to phosphorus, changes to metals. We selectively erode copper and lead and zinc and antimony and all these sorts of things, spread them across the world in that. So a number of chemical changes. We pollute the world with things, PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls and other things like that, which again are fossilizable and preserve this kind of stuff in strata. And also then biological changes, including, let's say, extinctions, which are just beginning. We don't yet have a mass extinction. So this is something that might happen if we're not careful, or if we simply let business as usual happen for a couple of hundred years. But we're not there yet. But things like species invasions. The cat I have up there is sitting next to me. Mimi, the cat. There are about 250 million to 500 million Mimis in the world, which are controlling the ecology of their back gardens. We've spread them around the world. There are rats, and, pigs, and goats, and zebra mussels, and all these sorts of things. Asian carp, which are busily and very quickly moving across the waterways of the United States right now. So we're reshaping the biology of the world in that way. We haven't yet changed climate. Not very much. It's beginning to change. But climate change is, oddly enough, one of the smaller parts of the Anthropocene. So far. Maybe by the end of the century it will become a big part of the Anthropocene, and probably in a few centuries it will be a very big part of the Anthropocene, but we're not there yet. Sea level also is trivial. 30 centimeters in a century, that is trivial. I can't measure that as a geologist, not in rocks. But again, that looks likely to creep up and maybe speed up. So we have a range of evidence which we use to try and say whether the Anthropocene is real or not, to compare it with older changes in Earth history, and then to try and come to some decisions as to how and why to formalize it. So that is a wee bit of an introduction to where we're at. I can expand on any of those topics until all of you are fast asleep there, in the room. But maybe it's time to let the mayhem begin. So I always prefer questions to one person just holding forth. So over to you, please, and feel free to ask whatever question from whatever direction, and we'll do our best to take this forward.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Well, maybe could we ask first about the Anthropocene Working Group itself? Sort of how does it work? Where does it meet? What are the things you're talking about right now? And then also, what is some of the evidence that you guys are really focused on, like technofossils, for example?
Okay. That's well. The group first is, well, let's say it's an international group of 30-ish. We're about 36 so far, and we're spread around the world. As best as we can. We do almost all our business by email. We have, you've probably heard of the Large Hadron Collider. The Large Hadron Collider is a huge scientific experiment involving thousands of physicists and costing, I don't know how many billion pounds or euros or dollars, per year. We are the exact opposite of the Large Hadron Collider. We have a budget of precisely zero. We have no money of our own. Most small stratigraphic working bodies, and we're at the very bottom of the rock. We're not a commission or a subcommission. We're a working group of a subcommission of a commission of the International Union. So we are the lowest of the low, hierarchically, in that. And we have no budget. So everything is done on the cheap and on the fly. It's just as we're meeting now by Skype. We've met once because the House of Kultur, a museum, an arts and cultural history museum in Berlin, was kind enough to sponsor a meeting last year, which we left at the chance. We said, thank you very much, and we went straight away. And about half of us were there. And we met, and we, for the first time, we discussed, and that was a very useful meeting. And we drank some beer afterwards, as we do. But we tend to discuss things in long email chains. And we have to find a common language. And say we're a mixture of geologists, archaeologists, oceanographers, glaciologists, biologists, international lawyers, and so on. Not all of whom are used to the arcane, and they are arcane ways of geologists. So there's a fair bit of getting the common language going. And what we do essentially, we communicate, we put our ideas together, essentially as scientific papers. That's the way we work. So we've published 2 large volumes, large enough to hurt you if they dropped on your toe, kind of volumes, on the Anthropocene, 30-odd papers altogether, plus a number of other papers. We had one out a couple of months ago on when the Anthropocene price we thought to start. We've got another one, in fact, just out at the beginning of this month, which I haven't even seen yet, on on that. And so that's the way we communicate with everybody else. We see how people react to these papers, how many bricks they throw at us, and from that we then take the ideas forward. And people get in touch with us once we've written our papers to say, yes, we agree, or no, that's nonsense, or perhaps we think you're half right, and we evolve our ideas from that. It is a very new science, this geology of humans in there. And so some of the ideas, like, let's say, as Stephanie mentioned, technofossils. We are trying to translate a lot of normal human life around us into geology. And part of that normal human life becomes normal geology. For instance, mass extinction events are not pretty, but they're normal geology. Bigger and smaller ones have happened a number of times in the past. So the one we're about to produce, it's small at the moment, it may get better, it may rival the Cretaceous Tertiary. But technofossils now are normal things, the computers in front of me and you, the books behind me, the map behind you, the camera, the seats you're sitting on, all those are absolutely bizarre geology. Absolutely geology without precedent. Because what they are, again, we try and translate them into geology. What are they? They're things that we construct. What is the nearest thing to a chair or a room? Well, let's say one of my favourite fossils is something you can find on the island of Tenerife. In fossil soils in Tenerife, little things about the size of an acorn, and they're fossilised wasps' nests. The wasp comes along, gets little bits of pumice, about 1 millimetre across, and sticks them together to make a house for itself. The termites do something similar in a rather more extravagant fashion, make themselves a nest. The room around you is part of the nest. And the houses you're going to go back to and flats are also part of nests like that. Only they're bigger and rather more geologically preserved. All the things around us are also, we can call trace fossils. They're things we construct that are all preservable, potentially preservable as fossils. And the thing about technofossils is, if you think of the wasp makes one sort of fossil, makes its home, it doesn't know anything else. That's its one trick. It's a one-trick wasp. Its relative is something called a trilobite, a fossilized woodlouse-like thing that lived a few hundred million years ago. Made 3 types of trace fossils. It made footprints going across the seafloor. It made a kind of a groove as it crawled across, or it made a deeper groove as it dug in. 3 kinds of trace fossils, one species. We're one species, and I don't know how many trace fossils we make, and the technofossils, but it is up there in the billions. It's very hard to find out how many types of stuff that we make. I googled, the only thing I could find was books. If you Google how many books have been published, it's 129 billion, believe it or not. Some of them are in only 2s or 3s. Somebody's full PhD thesis here and there. Others are, the bestsellers, and you've got a few million of them in there. That is already more diverse than the rest of the biological kingdom, where we know there are somewhere between 10 and 100 million species. So this is a remarkable thing, and of course these technofossils are evolving. The technology we have in front of us is very different from the technology, when you were all young, and it is hugely different from the technology when I was young, when none of this stuff was around or even dreamed of. So our technofossils are evolving much faster than we are, biologically, and much faster than anything else that we know of in geology. So again, this is part of the Anthropocene. It is, and again, it has no precedent, and we're trying to find our best way to fit it into the normal geological stories. So it's a bit of a struggle at times.
I remember one of your papers, I think with Mark Williams and Colin Waters, you talked about cities as technofossils. Yeah. What about New York City?
New York City is lovely. It's a huge. You can consider it two ways. One, it can be a physical unit in terms of rock. You can call it the urban strata of New York, the New York formation, if you like, as a rock unit. Or because this is all biologically built by human organisms, then it is an immense trace fossil system. So it has a part which is, if you like, beneath the skies, the surface expression of the buildings and the roads, and the garden, right? And it has an underground part. It has a subway system. It has the electrical systems. The water and drainage systems in there, the sewage systems. All those are potentially preservable, and they're big. One of the games we play is we try and weigh cities. So we're beginning to wonder, how much does London weigh? How much does Leicester, where I work, how much does that weigh? If you took all the buildings and flattened them down, took all the air out and flattened them down, as you might do in a very, very, very big earthquake or a war, how thick a layer would it make? How thick is the urban stratum? How well would it preserve? We know the underground part will preserve really quite well. The top part will preserve as rubble. So it's these kind of games that we can play. We know some cities will preserve very well, and some won't. San Francisco, anybody there from San Francisco? No San Franciscans.
One.
One? Okay, one. Well, I'm afraid San Francisco is not bound for immortality. It is going, it is disappearing. Because San Francisco is on a piece of crust which is rising upwards. At a few millimeters a decade, or something like that. So San Francisco will be worn away to produce sand and gravel and mud that will drift off into some sea or lake or some shoreline. Anybody from New Orleans?
Yep.
Hey, New Orleans. Okay, you have the jackpot. In New Orleans, you will have the perfect fossilized city. Because you're on the you are on the Mississippi Delta. You're on a part of the crust which is naturally subsiding. It is being depressed. Partly because the crust is going down, and partly because all the erosion products from half of the United States of America are landing on top of you. They're being brought up by the Mississippi River, and they're heavy. So they're pressing down on the crust. And also, sea level is rising. And New Orleans is already below sea level, and the sea is being held back by the sea walls, which won't last forever. So New Orleans is almost certain to be fossilized. And if you would like yourself to be fossilized, that is your immortality, then I think probably the best way to do it is to join the New York Mafia. Sorry, the New Orleans Mafia, I beg your pardon. New York, I'm not sure, but New Orleans, and be a very unsuccessful mobster. So you are taken out, tapped on the shoulder, and somebody puts a concrete overcoat on you and drops you in the Gulf of Mexico. And you will fossilize beautifully in your concrete overcoat, in those seafloor meds at the bottom of the sea. Next, the remains of New Orleans. It's almost unavoidable, in fact, become a fossil in that way. We know that this will happen because it's happened so often before. All the dinosaurs in the world have been found from situations like New Orleans, like the Mississippi Delta, like the Florida Everglades, and so on. That is where these sorts of fossils form. So as geologists, we can predict which cities will preserve and which will not, to a reasonable degree. So New York, I'm not sure. You're kind of on the edge, like London's on the edge. Amsterdam will fossilise. Manchester, my home city, will not. That is going up with the Pennine Hills. Again, in terms of working out what and where will survive, we just pretend geologists and work through these kinds of timescales and processes.
Can I ask you a follow-up question from that?
Yeah.
It's my familiarity with geology is, say, not expert, but seems that a lot of geology was once, and still today, of course, heavily focused on the past. But now you're effectuating a kind of shift where you're moving yourself to the future to think about the present. And in that sort of gesture, basically telling people, well, this is going to just be fossilized, right? This is going to be, and of course it's true. But what does it feel like to be a person who's essentially saying, like, prognosticating a finality, for these like major urban areas where the most of the world lives, and saying, it's going to be a great fossil, to moving forward and saying, like, in a sense, like after it's dead, essentially.
Well, yes, I agree. Yes, in terms of thinking like that, I still need to sit down and have a good cup of tea in front of me, or sometimes even a glass of beer, to work through these ideas. Geologists do tend, and I think increasingly, tended to move backwards and forwards in time. There are the things that we know have happened, that is, up to the present. And if you like, the former Anthropocene is based not on future prediction, except to say that, it will form significant geology, but what has happened so far, in that sense. So we've already, we have not yet had climate change, it's likely, but we've not yet had it, so it doesn't form part of our current description of the Anthropocene. But we've had many, many species invasions, and we've reshaped the biology of the Earth. That has happened, and that can't really go back in any sensible way to what was before. Again, just using geology, as you said, we know that all these transplanted rats and cats and goats and zebra mussels and Asian carp, because they have moved and they're doing very, very well where they are, they will form the future biology, of course, and they will therefore form the future fossils, the future paleontology, just looking forwards. And I think that doing that gives a sense of, the significance of what we're doing on the longer scale context that we know of, that makes any sense. There's a longer cosmic scale, but I don't really know how we can possibly fit into that, not yet. At least geology, we have a very good detailed history in the past. We know the processes, and we simply carry those processes forward to give a sense of how much change we're making at the moment, and how much we have not. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, partially. Yeah, I was also just thinking maybe in terms of, you're essentially thinking about the from the point of view of the end of this civilization, in a lot of ways, saying, well, although for New Orleans that's a lot sooner, that might not be 5,000 years, that might be 50 years. But you are thinking from a particular point of view about, after it's over in some ways, right? After it's all rubble, right? And it's sort of a... Yes,
I think because, we have this phrase in geology, the present is the key to the past. So the early geologists, and so geologists at the moment, look at present day settings, environments, to try and understand strata. So let us say if I find layers of sand and gravel, which form layers which are dipping at about 3 or 4 or 5 degrees, where the sand particles and gravel particles are very well sorted and rounded. We say, well, that might be a fossilized beach, because we go on a beach at the moment, whether for work or a holiday, and we can see those kinds of sediments around us. To try and understand strata, we have to look at geographic settings from seas, lakes, rivers, shallow seas, deep seas, ice caps, and all this sort of thing. But partly because we know that we're changing the earth, we know we're doing significant things, we have to try and work through to see how those will go into the future. And I think that is the new thing. Certainly, if we're looking to predict climate and so on, the IPCC have been putting these trying to work out what's going to happen in 10 years' time, 50 years' time, 100 years' time. It's a relative novelty for geologists to try and forward model for tens and hundreds of thousands of years and millions of years. And yet, some things you can perfectly well do. So I'm relatively confident about the fossilization of New Orleans and the non-fossilization of San Francisco. It will be very hard to reverse those particular tectonic escalators they're on. What is harder, I think, to do is to look at the trajectory, the equally important trajectory of, let's say, climate and sea level. Almost certainly both of those are going on the rise, on the up, and the warming, but the rate and the scale of both sea level rise and warming are uncertain, as the IPCC say, the number of different models they have of it, simply because there are so many interlocking feedbacks in the system. One of which, of course, is us. We don't know how we're going to behave, over the next, year, 10 years, 100 years, and so on, collectively as a species. And that. We don't know what the other feedbacks are going to be. Are we going to trigger a big methane outburst from permafrost? It looks likely, but the scale of that is uncertain on that. So we have the relatively easy stuff, which may be like the tectonic stuff, and we have the much more difficult things of, and significant to us things, of timings of major environmental shifts. That is difficult to predict precisely in the future.
Sorry. I think I understand what you were trying to get at also a little, and maybe I could try to ask it in a little different way. One of the things that's really striking about the Anthropocene is what it sort of does to people. It's sort of like the Anthropocene moment that people have a lot. We see it a lot. A friend of ours, Deborah Danowski, she's a philosopher, and she said, most of my life I was a metaphysician by trade. I spent most of my time in the libraries reading, books from the 16th century. I was really, up there. And then I discovered, I encountered this concept, the Anthropocene, and in particular the fact that potentially the Amazon could become a savanna in the next 50 years. And it just brought me back to the world. It just brought me to the world. That's one example. Another is there is an Iraqi vet, this Roy Scruton, a writer who lives in New York, who wrote an article for the New York Times called "Learning How to Die in the Anthropocene." And have you seen that?
Yes, I've seen that. Yes. Yeah.
And so that's another example. He said, right,
Sure.
the biggest thing to face isn't how are we going to get a Prius or something, but how to learn how to die in the Anthropocene, meaning how to recognize the civilization is already dead and to move on and form new ones or new ways of life. I was wondering, have you encountered this sort of effect or seen this sort of thing happen too?
Yes, I think very much. I think most of us have gone through it, and certainly those of us who are working on the Anthropocene, it has certainly, changed our lives. It's changed the way we have thought, we think through things. It's changed the angle and the context and the background and all of this kind of thing, because it's hard to change. And one of the, and we're not very good at putting this into words, as geologists tend to be rather blunt and tongue-tied people. But it's been very rewarding talking with historians like, I don't know, Dipesh Chakrabarty in Chicago, and philosophers like Akhil Bildrani, who's in New York, and so on, who also have picked up on the Anthropocene, and who can put it, so maybe a major catastrophe coming as a cat is beginning to prowl somewhere. So if you see the picture suddenly disappear, that is probably the cat. And the stretch on the ear. There she is.
She's trying
A
to.
mesopredator, like that. Because what they suggest is that really over the past 2 or 3 or 4 centuries, human philosophers and historians and metaphysicians have been putting humans further and further away from the center, of the universe, if you like. That we are just one evolutionary twig, on one tiny branch of a bigger branch of the whole tree of life, which is true, we are. We're just one species out of very many. And our time is tiny, it's minuscule in relation to geological time. And all of this was, if you like, was diminishing our significance with respect to that of nature. And I think what they say, what the Anthropocene is doing, it is reversing that, in quite an energetic fashion, that we are not just affecting the course of geological history, we have already changed the course of geological history. We have probably, by now, stopped the next glaciation. With this much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it's going to be hard to see how at any time soon, over the next 100,000 years, which is roughly what it will take, to drop the carbon dioxide levels down again, one can really get any significant consumption by scale. But it's not only that. It's not just a reprise of climate warming or cooling episodes, or even of mass extinction episodes. So we're not just a major player in that, we're bringing truly novel things to the Earth, like technofossils and such like, and like this means of reshaping the biosphere. And one, even as a geologist, say we tend to be fairly thick-skinned and blunt about this sort of thing. One can't help but be fairly profoundly impressed by that. And that we're actually living, in what may be a transformative moment, a geological moment, without precedent for millions of years, and perhaps for many millions of years. For instance, if you like, the air that you're breathing now, that is a relatively small example. It's 400 parts per million carbon dioxide. That amount of CO2 has not been in the atmosphere since the Pliocene epoch, about 8 million years ago. So that is, if you like, a modest but significant change. And probably enough to forestall a glaciation. But the nitrogen cycle now, the doubling of the Earth's reactive nitrogen at the surface, that has been said not had a parallel for 2.5 billion years in that particular aspect. So this is now big stuff. Even as a geologist, we tend to live in the big scale. It is impressive. The trick, I think, is, we have easy jobs. The geology of the Anthropocene and describing and so on is not trivial, but it's relatively straightforward. I think the difficult thing is learning how to live with the Anthropocene and seeing what it means, both for our particular species. We tend to be fair human-centered, in life, and also for the rest of life and things of our planet. And I think that is a difficult thing, which I know you're beginning to try to grapple with.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So I guess like when we're thinking about how, you know, the Anthropocene is useful as a term, there's like lots of people using Anthropocene besides geologists, like, you know, philosophers, I don't know, whoever. And there's, yeah, anyway, lots of people using this term. I even like came across a conference like a year ago that was called like Anthropocene Feminism. So I think like part of the question is like people are using Anthropocene to like develop an ethics, to develop a way of like living in the world, like orienting yourself in the world. So I at least am curious to know like you as a geologist, but also as a person, if Anthropocene as a term, as like a way of thinking about orienting yourself in the world or like creating an ethics or something, like does it affect you in that way? Also, one more question. There's this like rock conglomerate that's made of like rock and trash or whatever. Is that a technofossil? Or is that called something else?
Yes, okay, yes, I think you probably mean plastiglomerate, which is
What's it? Plastiglomerate. Okay. So
plastiglomerate, yes.
So just another part of the question, like things like that, like the existence of things like that, you know, like that scares people because like when you think about the Anthropocene or like for people to think about the world in like geological terms, it scares them because like it, you know, it says something about like our immortality or something. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes,
so that's
yes, very much. At least it does to be. Yes.
So
Well, yeah, certainly the Anthropocene has, and this is something that is making a good deal of my colleagues, members of my tribe, quite nervous. That here we have something that it's a geological time term, and may even become a formal geological time term, which is of interest to more than just a relatively small group of technical scientists who use it as their timescale. And so to have this work which has gone out into the world, and which shows no sign of being forgotten or dying down or you know, being a fad or anything like that. And certainly it is one, I think, of the problems we will have in getting the term formalized. Let's say if we recommend that it be formalized, and I think there is on the working group, you know, we have made no decisions yet, but there is certainly currently some feeling that, again, there is merit in the term, and if the term is real, then that, you know, is a reason, one reason, you know, to formalize it. But some of my colleagues, because of the way the word has gone out, will say the Anthropocene is political.
yeah, absolutely.
And because it is political, that means we cannot discuss it dispassionately. It means there is pressure on us as geologists now, which is pressure we're unused to in dealing with the term. And I think we simply have to get used to that. There's no, you know, at times one, you know, usually when in most stratigraphic working groups, you know, it's a little bit like growing mushrooms in the dark, you know, completely, and ideas grow very, very slowly, and nobody pays much attention, you know, except a handful of colleagues. And here we are out, and many people are interested in you know, what we might be thinking, what we might decide. That's great, but it also is scary in another way. Scary for us, scary for me personally. It's what does it mean? One of my colleagues, a man called Peter Haft, who came up with this idea of the Technosphere, from which technofossils came across. He's at Duke University. You know, very. You might invite him one day. He's a very good man for discussion, and has very good ideas which come at you sideways. He says there are many Anthropocenes, you know, because the term is still out there, and different people use the word Anthropocene in different ways. An archaeologist will use it in a different way from a geologist, and that currently there is an archaeological Anthropocene, which is much older, and the geological Anthropocene, which tends to be more recent. And the ways that, let's say, a metaphysician will use the Anthropocene are probably different from the ways that a biologist would use it, and so on. And I think that is also fine. That's the way that discussion goes. We as a group are focusing mainly on what we call the stratigraphic, or the geological Anthropocene. A subset of the Anthropocenes out there. What it might mean, again, to get away from the technicalities, what might the Anthropocene mean? It means, in a wider sense, if you take me as a human being, which I occasionally still try and think I remember I am in this, it probably means it's a phase in the growing up of the human species, community, experiment, what you call it. In that, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but for most of human history, there's been this idea that humans are on a backcloth of a very big nature out there, which is very forgiving. And no matter what kind of rubbish we talk about, what kind of mess we make, nature will kind of heal and regrow and carry on and so on. And if we do make any changes, they'll be kind of minor changes, and again, nature will kind of absorb that and go on. That no longer appears to be the case. And I think a large part of Anthropocene is predicated upon the idea that anything that we do will make a substantial difference to the future. And what is probably even scarier is that because we as a community, of course, are not united, and we go to war with each other. We have big trade disagreements with each other, in different communities, different groups. Within the country, we are not united. There are some people who have very much more influence upon other humans, and indeed upon the Anthropocene than others. If you are a CEO of a very large oil company, your decision will probably leave a geological imprint. And you as a person with an address and a telephone number, and so on, may make a very large impact, far larger than any of us can make. And of course there are pressures on you, so it's not simple, you're not a person in isolation. And yet, what we're very aware of now is the kind of decisions that are going to be made by us collectively are going to determine the course of the future Anthropocene. We know that we've pushed humanity, or the world, along a different path. The novelist Terry Pratchett would say, down a different trouser leg of history. That, I think, we can't go back to Halsey. But the direction we will take does depend on really decisions over the next century, and probably even over the next few years and decades. And I think that is a rather sobering thought. Certainly I find it sobering. I'm not quite sure how to go about it, and I'm not sure what is the right decision and what is the wrong decision. If one is to have what some people like, let's say, our colleague also on the working group, Earl Ellis, thinks of, we have to design a good Anthropocene. Presumably a rather more stable Anthropocene, a rather more biologically diverse Anthropocene, a rather slow-moving Anthropocene. Quite how one goes about doing that, again, it's out of my field of expertise by a long way. Sorry, plastiglomerate. You had the word. Yes, plastiglomerate is a lovely idea for a rock, which in itself is rather trivial, I have to say. But it highlights a bigger problem. The word plastiglomerate was formed by some very acute researchers who looked at picnic sites on beaches in Hawaii, where there are pebbles and also lots of bits of plastic. They saw that when people lit little campfires and had picnics, then the plastic melted around the rock to produce a kind of a dense rock, like a conglomerate, but with a matrix of plastic, of burnt plastic, melted plastic. And they said that this is a rock which can last a long time. It's dense, it can get easily buried. The plastic, once it's around it, will tend to stay and hang out and so forth. And it's a lovely idea, and it got into the newspapers and so on, and full credit. What it does highlight is the wider problem, again, plastic. New stuff that we make, stuff that has only been around for about 70 years. Again, mid-20th century. Nylon was formed, I think, just before the Second World War. But really, 1950s, people were collectively producing 1 or 2 million tons of plastic a year. We now produce 300 million tons a year, almost none of it recycled. The total amount of plastic produced is now approaching 6 billion tons. How much is 6 billion tons? Well, I once spent an entertaining cup of tea working out that if you take a standard, what we call in England, cling film, but you call plastic wrap, you could wrap the world with plastic wrap. The whole world, land and sea, one layer of plastic wrap with 6 billion tons. That's how much there is of that. The projection, again, the idea was projection. We're currently making 300 billion tons a year. If we keep that going and accelerate at the rate, by, I think the year is 2050, even before that, there will be 30-odd billion tons. That is 4 or 5 layers of plastic wrap around the whole earth. And we know in practice about 10% of plastic gets recycled. A little bit of it gets burnt, stuck in incinerators. A lot goes into landfill. Quite a lot simply goes across the world as trash. And again, we've just gone into this and prepared one of the papers we're preparing by our long strings of emails is on the geology of plastic. And this is significant. You go to any beach around the world and you're liable to find bits of plastic. Bottles and bottle tops and something like that. The real killer, though, is not just the big bits of plastic, which are here and there, stuff called microplastic. Most of the clothes that you and I are wearing are now plastic. There is cotton still there and wool, but those are kind of now posh, but a lot of it is acrylic and stuff like that. A lot of fleece, the fleece I have somewhere to keep me warm in an English spring, is almost entirely synthetic. You put that into a washing machine, and it does get washed every now and again, and it starts to walk towards me as my clothes in the morning. That will release, and people have counted, about 3,000 or 4,000 little fibres, little brightly coloured fibres of plastic. And those will go straight through the sewage, they'll go to the sewage plant, but because they're tiny, they won't get trapped. And they'll go straight into the river and they'll go into the sea. And you can go now into any beach in the world, pick up a handful of sand, through a relatively simple process, stir it out, and you will find microplastic fibres in there. You'll go to the bottom of the sea, anywhere in the world, you get a handful of mud, and you will find in that handful of mud some microplastic everywhere around the world, pretty well. Because the stuff partly floats, and then creatures eat it, and it goes through the gut, and it goes into fecal pellets, and it sinks to the sea floor. It's microplastic. So it's one of, if you like, the signals of the Anthropocene, and it's as good as the plutonium that we're also contaminated with in cesium from the radionuclides. Again, it is so, your plastic agglomerate is a tiny part of a much bigger phenomenon. Plastic really is more than just trash. It is now an integral part of ground geology. And we can use it, we can practically use it. I have a PhD student just starting. One of her jobs will be to get into the growing world of geology of plastics. So she will take deep sea cores and analyse those for microplastic. And sure as eggs as eggs, she will find microplastic there. Extraordinary stuff.
Hi. I actually was at the Pocket Bay Berlin Anthropocene seminars that happened. And I was in one of the Technosphere seminars. And
Yes.
the conveners were talking about you as someone who could have been there, potentially. And so this conversation is really fascinating because I'm hearing the kind of side of the conversation that we weren't hearing necessarily in that room. We had an evolutionary biologist and a few other geologists, but I see if I can formulate this properly. I've been fascinated by this term for a long time, and I kind of used it, I think like a lot of you were talking about, the way that it flips the way you think about the world. I've been searching for ways to kind of stop putting humans outside of nature and start thinking of us as kind of holistically involved in the natural ecosystem. And as I think more and more about the Anthropocene and as the concept has evolved, there's been this, like you just said, the idea of the separation of, like, once again, kind of seeing us as set aside because of the way we're able to impact the landscape. And one of the things that came up in this Technosphere seminar was the concept of other mass extinctions or like huge ecological changes that have been based on life forms. And this was something that's new to me, is the idea of the something like evolutionary progress that actually wreaks havoc. So the transition from anaerobic to aerobic life being called either the oxygenation event or being called the Great Dying, right?
Yes.
Okay, so this concept somehow for me is linked to what humans are doing now, and I'm always trying to find ways when I talk about the Anthropocene not to have it set us aside and not to have it kind of create this hubristic sense of like we should go on and geoengineer now. And I'm just wondering what you think about, are there other transitions like the Great Dying that were created by life forms, and are we one of those also? And like how do we get set apart without becoming hubristic and destroying ourselves? It's been big. But.
Yeah. No, it's a great question. The Technosphere is linking that with the Great Oxygenation Event to just a little bit under 2.5 billion years ago, when oxygenic photosynthesis appeared and evolved and was invented, if you like, by algae. And oxygen, before that, for 2 billion years, it had been the oxygen at the surface. And life had evolved and was very happy in those circumstances. In that, so you have a whole range of microbes who use sulfur and other means of getting energy. And then appeared this stuff called oxygen. And oxygen, if you're an anaerobic bacteria, has an equivalent effect that, let's say, chlorine gas will have upon us. It is very toxic, very reactive, very lethal, and it is very difficult to learn to live with that. And of course, there was the Great Dying, you're quite right, a lot of it. When oxygen came around, it was, all the anaerobic bacteria, they're still there, but they've just moved into the corners of the world. They're in deep muds on the sea floor, they can be in the soil, but deep down in the soil where oxygen doesn't get to, and so on, in lake floors again, below the level of oxygen. But of course there are winners and losers. Any creature that could adapt to using this highly energetic stuff, this rocket fuel of the gas, did very well. And that really, because it's so energetic, it laid the foundations for animal life, things that could metabolize in a very effective and energetic and rapid way. So one of the questions is, and the Technosphere does beg this question, is that are we approaching a similar kind of transition the Earth? So again, is it not just another, yet another, catastrophe in Earth history, but really something different, in the way that the Great Oxygen event was really something different in Earth history. Well, it's hard to say, but what I really like about the Technosphere concept, again, which is very much been a house later, and I didn't understand it at first. Geologists, again, were slow on the uptake. So these rather, what seems an abstract concept, it took a while to sink in, and it's still sinking in a way. But it helps square one particular circle. For instance, so when we as geologists, we see what happens. We try and work out Earth history. And that's, if you like, the easy bit. We see that from strata. Sea level rising and falling, animals evolving, dying off, and so forth. And then we also look for the causes of those events. And those causes are usually, again, fairly big and obvious. A meteorite going splat on the Earth. Volcanoes erupting, and showering the atmosphere with ash and gas, and that's a fairly potent kill mechanism, but also a relatively simple one which we can know well from experience and experiment. Come the Anthropocene, though, we're in a very different territory. If a meteorite was a driver for the Cretaceous-Tertiary extinctions, and if volcanoes were the driver for the Permo-Triassic extinctions, then currently humans are the driver of whatever transition is taking place now on the Earth. Now, humans are orders and orders and orders of magnitude more complicated than the average meteorite or the average volcano. I don't understand one single human. I don't understand myself, let alone any other human. And I know I change. I'm a different human before I've had coffee in the morning. And after the first beer late at night. I'm a very different human. And I react differently. And you put 2 humans, 3 humans together, you put 3 geologist humans in a room, you'll get 5 different hypotheses about any different stratum or other. So we're terribly complicated. And I think philosophers and historians and so on have struggled to understand what it is that drives humans. Now we have all of these complicated beings coming together, interacting in ways also we don't understand very well, to drive the Earth. How do we cope with that? That's suddenly a much more complicated driver. Well, let's say the technosphere is one way to square that circle. It is to take it to a different plane and say that humans, together with all the things they do make up a new system, and a new emergent system, in the way that biology, the biosphere, was an emergent system upon the Earth, with its own rules and its own patterns. And we have to understand that system. And that is made up of hardware, the things, computers in front of us, the chairs, the subway, and so on, our cars, our factories, that's the hardware. And the software. The software is not really, I guess we're part of the hardware. The software is what's in our heads, what we create between us. The software is also our committees, our trades unions, our boards, our governments, and so on. That's the software and the things that they do in the system. And by looking at it on that scale, one can begin, as Peter is doing, to make some sort of sense of that. And the trouble is, with that, there is a catch. One of the things that seems to come out of that Peter has pointed out, is that we're no longer quite as much in charge as we think we are, because we are part of the system. We are not a creature of free will conversing rationally with other creatures of free will. we are caught within the technosphere, because the technosphere, again, as Peter's pointed out, keeps us all alive. If we were all rational, individual creatures of free will living outside the technosphere, let us say as hunter-gatherers, 10,000 years ago or 20,000 years ago, the Earth could support a few million hunter-gatherer humans living in very small communities or as individuals. Once we got together and began to make stuff to help us farm, to make so on, we could grow in numbers. But growing in numbers, we became dependent on that stuff of the technosphere. And we are still very, without the technosphere, the world could only support, you tell me, but Peter suspects it's of the order of 1% of the current human population of the Earth. So we need all of this complicated system we're in, the technosphere system, to keep us all alive. We have to keep it going. So in some way, we are caught within the technosphere, trapped within it, if you like, and we have, we can't do without it, because if we tried, we would die. As simple as that. So our job, I guess, is to keep the technosphere going, because we have no option. But to keep it going in such a way, as to, I guess, create Ellis's good Anthropocene. Earl is one person. We've had great discussions. We have a paper we hope going through the rounds on this, which involves both Peter and Earl, and you can see that Earl is somebody who would rather like the idea of saying that we are in charge and say it's our social structures, which are key here, he would say. And that gives us a wee bit, if you like, more say and more control. Whereas if you think of it as an emergent system of which we're part, that makes it as a system that we then have to keep going. We have to keep feeding and oiling and greasing the wheels of to keep things going. That's the two-edged sword. It helps us understand, I think, the Anthropocene, but it also suggests or states limitations to us and degrees of freedom within this system. I'm so far out of my depth now that, the waters are close over my head long time ago, in this. I'm a rock and fossil man. So I'm seeking help urgently to take this idea forward, or sideways, inside out, or something.
Okay.
This is maybe more technical. So I remember reading an article somewhere, I don't remember exactly where by who, but it was someone suggesting a date, probably around 1550, of a European contact with the Americas as a good date for the beginning of the Anthropocene, both from sort of a technical standpoint and a political, symbolic standpoint, and it's definitely sort of the strongest case where these are really entwined. And I wanted to know sort of if that's been discussed at all, if you would sort of go over the technical bits of that and sort of how the politics of that would complicate that decision.
Yes, that's very interesting. It's a great question. Again, all have been. Yes, we have discussed it. It's a very interesting and fruitful paper by Simon Lewis and Mark Marsden, published in Nature not long ago, about 2 or 3 months ago. And yes, it did hit the headline. It's everywhere. And they had 2 suggestions, for the beginning of the Anthropocene. And they went as far as to say that those were the 2 which satisfy the criteria, for the stratigraphic criteria for the Anthropocene. They had 1610, which was to reflect, if you like, the European discovery of the Americas and all that happened after that. And they suggest that the European impact, if you like, upon the Americas, one caused a sharp population decline in the native American population, to the extent that all of the, had a population crash, genocide, if you like, by disease and other by means. And that caused a regrowth of forests in North America. Those forests pull down carbon dioxide, and they link a very small, about a 10 ppm, modest fall in CO2 that you can detect in ice cores as having been caused by this collision of Europe with the Americas. And they also say that that also caused, from the Americas, things like maize, corn, spread around the world, to leave again a distinctive imprint, in the Earth's strata. They had a secondary idea. They had an idea, their second suggestion, which I think was not their favoured one, was 1964, which they had as the peak of when there were the A bomb tests, the atom bomb tests, the hydrogen bomb tests. They're the things that both showered us with plutonium and cesium and tritium and so forth, and they also created excess carbon-14. So this is bomb-produced carbon-14, which went to plants, and which can detect in tree rings, and they took the peak of the carbon-14 as boundary, as their second option for boundary. Yes, we did discuss it. Again, very interesting ideas, fruitful. We suggested, in fact, we have a very short lecture in Nature. They allowed us a brief response to that for the working group. We have a rather longer discussion out in a journal called Anthropocene Review, which should appear, together with another rejoinder from Simon and Mark in sometime, I think, next few weeks, where we suggest, firstly, that 1610 is probably not optimal. Yes, it could be a boundary, but it isn't the most obvious or widely traceable boundary in a practical, pragmatic sense. Simply because the CO2 dip, one, you will only see it in particular types of rock, and that particular type of rock is layers of ice and snow and Antarctica, Greenland. Important, but that's really the only place you'll see that dip. Other things like, say, the spread of maize, of corn around the world, that was a big spread. It was a food crop that's gone around the world, but it took a couple of hundred years to spread from the Americas to Europe, to Africa, to different parts of Africa, to Asia, and so on. So compared with the kind of changes what we saw in the mid-20th century, where things took years or decades only to spread around the world, it's rather slower and more spread out. So not as good as a boundary in practical, pragmatic, technical sense. So we've suggested that, yes, it was a very big event in terms of, like, world history, human history, but you also had other big events taking place. Like before that, the Black Death in Europe. After that, the Black Death in Asia and China and so on. So it's one of a number of big events. And geologically, as our knowledge stands at the moment, we didn't think. We thought, great idea, very good to have it, very good to knowledge, second great idea, but probably not as good geologically as the mid-20th century. And the 64, we thought again, it's a good idea, and the idea of having the golden spike in tree rings, I find, personally appealing. But it's choosing it at they had it at the peak of the curve, of the curve. Whereas in geology, if you like, what we call an anomaly like that, you usually take it at the beginning of the anomaly. Simply because in a practical sense, it's hard to tell the front of the peak from the back of the peak unless you've got a very, very good record. But all the peak, normally you have a fragmentary record. So if you're anywhere within that excessive carbon-14 or excessive plutonium or excessive cesium or excessive americium, it's simply easy to recognize. So we prefer to move the boundary back a little bit to the beginning. And we've suggested both around 1945, when the first A-bomb tests started, out of Bordeaux. We have another paper out suggesting that perhaps the early 1950s, when you had if you like, a takeoff, a sudden takeoff around the world of plutonium, carbon-14, cesium, and so on. So we've engaged with the ideas. We think they're useful, though we think in terms of a boundary, yes, they could work. I've worked with lots of boundaries which are very dodgy in geology, but these particular ones were not, we thought, optimal on current knowledge. I don't think they'll go away, but on current knowledge, we think they're not quite as effective as others that have been suggested.
Hi, thanks for the talk. This is really interesting. So I just had a quick question for you. You mentioned that you're more of a dirt and rocks guy, right? And
yes.
So I was curious if you had any reservations about the ways that the Anthropocene has been picked up in other disciplines in the humanities, political theory, philosophy, etc. You mentioned Antipas a little bit earlier in your talk, and so like part of the argument that he makes is that well, ultimately we're all in this sinking ship together, and this needs to bring about a change in the way that we think, where we realize we're all in it together. And some people have been critical of the way that the Anthropocene has been used to sort of like paper over some of the actual divisions between people, right? And we're talking about things just at the level of species, which makes sense from a geological point of view. But as you mentioned, some people, it makes a big difference whether Rex Tillerson goes out and makes a decision in the middle of the day than a yeoman farmer somewhere, right? And so people like Jason Moore have been critical of the term Anthropocene just because they feel that, in fact, it sort of obfuscates some of the historical specificity of the drivers of the problem, right? And so I was just wondering what you would make of that potential criticism.
Yeah, well, I'm as a geologist, and particularly a stratigrapher, we are used to being the most obscure of creatures, really. So the idea that a stratigraphic term, can be found at all interesting, let alone important by the people, is a definite novelty. And I would say, I know some of my colleagues are a little bit horrified by it. So, because it is taking us well outside of our comfort zone, anything like it, and it's taking the argument into realms that we're not at all familiar with. Personally, I think it's on the whole, it's a good thing. It's a good thing, I think, for us in general to get outside of the comfort zones, because then we learn stuff. We learn rather more quickly than that. I find it good that, part of what we study, this obscure thing called stratigraphy, can be found useful by other people. I'm old enough now to know that if it's found useful, it will be both used, misused, abused, and all of that. That is, we're human. We will have different ideas on how that, and we will disagree with each other on what is the use and what is the misuse of the term Anthropocene. So it will be mayhem out there, as it is, in this discussion amongst us. Out of that mayhem, there may come something of more lasting value. And I say, I think the broad sense in which Anthropocene is being used, it provides a different context within which to think of human life, in fact, wider life, in the broader sense. I think that is useful, to think about, of what we do within a geological context. So, broadly speaking, I'm pleasantly surprised, as well as bewildered, and confused by the use of the Anthropocene in the wider world, and certainly when the likes of Epoch and Kegel and Bruno Latour and others use it, I'm generally impressed by the way they try to stay faithful, to try and to understand the geology and the strategy behind it, so it's not a glib use of the word, and also by the way they try and use it seriously and not capriciously or gratuitously. I'm sure one can use the word Anthropocene entirely gratuitously, but so far as I've seen, I could disagree with a number of things that have been said about it, but on the whole, I don't see the debate as being overall damaging either for wider discourse, or even, for geology or stratigraphy. So by and large, and personally, I have enjoyed and found rewarding whatever discussions I've had with people from the arts, the humanities, the social sciences, and so forth. I've learned a lot from it because starting from a very low base, admittedly, in these things, but it's been great.
Actually, this conversation just made me want to ask: has there been a change in the field of geography, geology so far, with regards to all these questions about the changes that are coming forward and all these interactions you're having with the humanities? Has there been an understanding that maybe in the hard sciences that it is lacking a certain engagement with other topics, politics, or for that matter, ethics, that needs, or even economics for that matter, a big part that needs to be brought back in, or that the individuals participating in these subject matters needs to have a better understanding of them in order to learn what the effects of, or in order to understand Anthropocene, for example. Is that coming into play when you engage with your students, for example, who are becoming scholars of their own?
I think there's a general recognition that I think it's not so much that scientists have not engaged. I think there has been a fair engagement before the Anthropocene, but it's been patchy and some people do much more than others. And there's a general tendency, I think, certainly in the world of academia, for us to stay in our bunkers, where we know the subject, where we're comfortable, where we know we can make a career, publish papers, and go along the usual tramlines. And it's quite hard, and it still is quite hard, to get out of that, because you need to invest a very bit of time and effort to understanding other fields and other points of view. And that's true even within sciences. So it's quite hard for me to, even let's say as a stratigraphic geologist, even to understand a structural geologist who looks at the dynamics and deformation of mountain ranges, or a geophysicist who looks at the, let's say, the interior structure of the Earth, let alone a biologist who's looking at genetics, where I'm now completely lost, let alone an economist or a historian or philosopher. So there are big learning curves everywhere, I think, for us.
Well, that's simply not what I was asking. I was also wondering regarding, say, higher education is becoming more extremely inaccessible to people. There are funding cuts into different departments, especially in the United States. You might have heard the news about once in Congress denying funding to NASA for any climate change research that just passed, although it hasn't been fully accepted yet. But such things like that are happening throughout academia. what is the notion with a working group such as yourself, the Anthropocene Working Group? Because this is how would you engage, or what are the thoughts behind this?
Well, I think that as a group, it's not we have a very narrow remit. A narrow remit is to examine the scientific foundation and basics of the Anthropocene, and then to work out whether it might be a workable, pragmatic use for geological unit, and then make our recommendations on how might one define it in terms of what and where, with the microbes like, and so on. Now, these wider questions we all know are important on that, simply because in practice they are. And some members of the working group, let's say Will Stephan, for instance, James Witzke, Paul Britain himself, are very involved in these bigger questions with education, with politics, with economics, and so they are fully engaged in that. I think what the Anthropocene can do within it specifically, it seems to provide a pathway or pathways along which encourage communication between different disciplines. And I think it has done that. It has done, in academia, there's a lot of being spoken about, let's say, multidisciplinary science. And part of that is simply hot air spoken so as to have a better chance of winning a grant that are getting on in a career. What I've seen about it is genuinely, people who are well outside of my field have approached me and approached my geological colleagues to discuss the Anthropocene. And that, to me, is, multidisciplinary work in practice. It's really happening. That has done something else. It has meant that in order that I can understand Deepesh and he can understand me, and I can understand Akil and he can understand me, and so on, we have to talk very simply. We have our own languages. I have a geological language, which I don't even understand myself at times, let alone people in stratigraphy. And what I have seen in meetings, let's say at the Hackney and elsewhere, is that, there are languages and jargons which are just as fits within the social sciences and the arts. We can, they can be quite as incomprehensible as we are. Therefore, to talk through the Anthropocene, we have to adopt a common, simple language. We have to speak simply and clearly, rather than retreating behind the kind of terminology we use to say that we are the high priests of this or that discipline. We have to toss those aside. And I think that in itself is a very useful thing. And it's a necessary thing. And if that will carry on happening, I think that will cause quite a ripples within the whole knowledge enterprise thing, which will clearly, feed into education, will feed into contact with, economists, into politics and so forth. We can all be guilty of talking in a way so abstruse that nobody can understand this. And I really do think that's a serious barrier in all of that. With the Anthropocene, if we are to talk the Anthropocene, we must move into standard English or French or Spanish or whatever.
I think one of the things that we talked about here a few times was that we found it maybe ironic, but also revealing that that you would name a time the Anthropocene, right? Sort of this Epoch of Man, and the metrics that you have are only metrics of catastrophe, essentially, right? And so it's sort of an interesting thing to crown a time period and say, well, how do we measure? You could say our impact on the Earth. Well, it's all devastation for the most part. So I think it's sort of interesting, and I think, but the effect of it, I think, is so much more interesting. I think sometimes when people have tried to, I think, let's say, criticize the Anthropocene for maybe a lack of specificity, maybe, or something like that. It's been a way to, I think, try to assure people that, everything's still the same. It's still the same problems. It's still the same constitutive fabric. There's still sexism, racism. It's capitalism. It's this or that. But I think what's interesting about the Anthropocene is that it skips over the question of critique and blame, because it almost says it doesn't matter at this point, because you're in a time where. But the reason it doesn't matter is because we're in a time that's been opened up where everything has to, in a sense, like you're saying, be reconfigured, right? And of course, the question of how that's going to be done is important. It's important for us to think about that. So I think that rather what happens with the Anthropocene is that it institutes some kind of a common sense, a common time that we find ourselves in, right? And that common doesn't have to be one of a species, a non-variegated species, but rather it puts us down on the earth and says the task at hand actually is thinking about what our future is going to be like, right? And that's a question of right now, which is more than can be said for a lot of other practices, right? It actually doesn't say what we need to have is a detached. It's ironic, right? But, so in geology, we need to have a detached sort of aloofness towards this thing. But in fact, the Anthropocene does the exact opposite. It says we need to have a fundamental involvement in the earth, right? Because we already have it, and so we have to essentially take it up and guide that. And not allow that question, I think, just to pass, to let it be a CEO or a whoever. But rather it says that's our task. And so I think that's kind of an interesting accomplishment.
I think those are all interesting points. The Anthropocene is throwing up all kinds of paradoxes like that. It's, the age of humans, and yet what it is, geologically, is not... It's like a human-focused epoch. I mean, the significance of that is the Earth is changing. Regardless of whether it's us, let's go for it, or something else, or a volcano, or a meteorite, or even, let's say, if my cat suddenly got much more intelligent, and even more intelligent, slightly more intelligent, and ganged up with other cats, and began to cut down forests, and swim and catch whales in the ocean and such like. Part of the problem is that it is humans, it is us that are driving this, but the Anthropocene geologically is not to find the imprint of humans on the Earth system. It is to chart the change in the Earth system. And that is, I think, a fairly key difference, in that. It so happens at the moment, it's humans that are driving most of the change. It might be, 100 years' time, we will, let's say, we might have a plague or war. The Anthropocene will go on, perhaps driven by methane outbursts, from the bottom of the sea, or by some other feedbacks coming in. So we will have been the trigger, but not the main driver then of what's going on. Whether you count that as catastrophe or not, I'm not sure. Again, if you think of the lives, there are currently more people in the Earth living longer and more comfortable lives, with more stuff around them, able to listen, to, anything from, the Beatles, whoever is the current to Mozart or whatever, while eating well, drinking well. The current Anthropocene, for many humans, is actually, as some people have said, the best time ever. The question mark is whether that is sustainable or not. That's something else. But it's, and if we look at, let's say, biologically, yes, overall we're losing species. But if we take, again, our back garden, because of the transmigration species that is part of our action, part of our design, we often have more biodiverse front gardens and back gardens and forests even around us than we may have had 10,000 years ago, before we started all of this. So there are winners and losers, and I think it may be one of the jobs of the Anthropocene to actually try and define this rather more clearly, and not to say, it is all bad news, it's all good news, or whatever, but simply try and say, what is going on? And then there may be an element of are these things that are going on good and bad, to what degree, and if so, for who and for what? In there, taking any definition of good or bad. And again, in the sense of trying to say that the Anthropocene, let's say, blames all humans or blames no humans or something else. And again, I think one can develop that. I don't think we should, if we're interested in understanding the driver of the Anthropocene, which is humans, I'm not sure that implies that we have to take this as a species, or to say that one human is the same as another. I think if we're doing the job properly, then really we have to use the tools of the historians and the economists and so on to look at different social forces and groupings and the effects of individuals versus groups and all of this and go into all of this. It is clearly all, you have to look at this in peace, and you have to look at that in war as well, because that is another driver of geology in there. So it doesn't, I think, absolve, if you like, from blame, if the word blame is involved, or responsibility may be a better word in that. It shouldn't simplify, if one is doing the job properly. It should bring a whole lot of things which are not considered in geology into geology. If you look at the cause and effect business, it is clearly bringing geology into people who are doing the cause and effect work for real. The deep ocean, who knows, and many others in that. So it does change, I think, the backcloth. I think, if, Deepesh says, and it says that in the historians usually thought of nature as a fell inert backcloth, the natural world. It clearly is not. And clearly, the natural non-human world is now very closely interwoven, intertangled, with the human world in all its dimensions. So it's providing that as a means to try and understand it, and we have to try and understand it at a small scale, very locally, in one corner, one back garden, part of one house, and one living business, and then also at the bigger scale, of towns, countries, and the world, as it were. So, I'm not sure if that is an answer to your question.
Not sure it was a question even, but. Does anybody have any more questions? Or?
I have a quick one. So it seems like the Anthropocene Working Group, in general, has a fairly kind of moderate and sober position towards what to sort of as a body to call for as far as ethical choices for us as humans in the world, or policy, or something like that. I forget the guy's name that you mentioned who coined this Technosphere concept, but also he seems to have a fairly kind of gradual and moderate approach to what should be done. In other words, let's take the Technosphere and kind of just administer it or govern it in such a way that it can become a good, right? We can have a good Anthropocene, we can have a sustainable Technosphere or something like that, a sustainable Anthropocene. But are there people within the group or other people that you've worked with that are grappling with this question who are more catastrophist in their approach to it, or taking a position outside of humanity and saying, okay, fine, let's have humans should disappear off the face of the earth entirely. Do you encounter positions like this?
Yes.
That take Anthropocene as a very kind of moral concept that has immediate moral implications.
Yes, I think morality clearly comes into it. It's a big factor within humans, and if humans interlink with geology, then morality and geology, are therefore linked in that way. I think we have to separate, if you like, the remit of the working group, which is, I think, descriptive, analytical. If you like, we try and diagnose, if you like, what's going on. It's not our role at all, I think, or to suggest a cure or even a way forward. That's it's in our remit. We say whether the Anthropocene is real. Is it real enough to be formalized? If so, how? Within the group, there are people who are, in, if you like, the life beyond the remit of the group, and in informal discussions, who are very concerned with that. Say, you would have, we do, Earl Ellis is he's a very good descriptive earth scientist in saying what has happened to the landscape through time and how it's changed, and that's a crucial addition to our understanding of what the Anthropocene is. But of course he goes beyond that as well, and he is a human being who takes the point of view that one can work towards, to say, towards a good Anthropocene. I think his words are something like that. We took it, we broke it, we've got to fix it, and we can do that, as it were. To make, and I guess the idea is to make life tolerable and good for the maximum number of people on Earth and so forth. So, and I think that probably partly comes out of a sense of, if you like, of natural optimism, in there. There are other people, let's say, there's the likes of, let's say, Clive Hamilton, not on the group, who by, if you like, by profession and so on, it's one of the pessimists who says, we are causing a lot of damage, to the Earth, and we will struggle to cope with that on there. Which is simply another attitude. I can't, beyond my levels of wisdom, such as they are, by many orders of magnitude, to say one is wrong. They're both ways of looking at, valid ways of describing the world. And there are people like, let's say, Will Stephen, who was very involved. Again, you can see the likely serious implications, for the human and the non-human living world, of the trajectory we're on, which is by the Anthropocene. And again, in his other life, he's trying to, let's say it would be sensible to try and slow the rate of carbon dioxide emissions, slow the rate of climate change, and minimise the effect of climate change, and to minimise the extent, the likely future extent of ocean acidification. So, there are a variety of things going on out of there. One of which is the work of the working group. And as chair, I have, in some way, to try and keep us more or less within, the usual stratigraphic tramlines of that. And if we don't, I think certainly my colleagues in the tribe out there of stratigraphers will not take us seriously. And if the science is not taken seriously, that will probably rebound upon all of the wider uses of the Anthropocene. So we have to try and do that. But certainly, yes, one doesn't have to throw a pebble very far, to hit a wider implication of the Anthropocene in any one of a number of dimensions.
Okay, well, I bet you're kind of tired. We kept you, I think, longer than we even planned. So maybe, unless there's anything pressing, no. Okay, maybe we can wrap up now. Is that it's good?
Yeah. So thanks a lot
Yeah.
for talking to us.
Thanks so much.
That's been a pleasure. Take these ideas through. Well, all the very best. I haven't learned enough about what you're all trying to do to grow the Anthropocene in New York. But maybe that's for the next time. When I shall sit with a glass of beer and you will do all the talking.
Okay, cool.
Great.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay, all the best then. Bye.
Bye.